Hello and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. My name is Catherine King and I'll be your host. Welcome to season 3. It's absolutely lovely to have you joining us. In this series, we will be talking to executives and thought leaders from a range of industries, departments and functions, all about their passions, experiences and challenges within data and analytics. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Business of Data podcast. Now, this week's theme is all about, as said by Winston Churchill, never wasting a good crisis, specifically how organizations could be using the COVID-19 era to improve and review systems, transformation and processes. Now, of course, we certainly won't be taking away from the challenges and heartache that this period of time is causing everyone, but rather looking on it in a positive light as to what organizations can really do to make the best of a really awful situation. Felt like I had to get that one in there early. Now, to chat about how we can do this, I have brought in Matt Lovell, who's the Data Analytics and Insight Director for Eurostar. Now, Matt is a frequent speaker for us over on the Crinium events side, so I'm sure at some point would have seen him speak. But if you haven't had the chance to meet him, then just a few intro facts to get us going. As I say, since April 2018, Matt has been Eurostar's Data Analytics and Insight Director, but prior to this, he has worked in a number of well-known brands, including Thomas Cook and Jack Wills. And if you can't find him at his work desk, you'll most likely find him in the kitchen cooking up a storm or perhaps outdoors running. Although probably not on a day like today. We are recording and it is certainly a very wet day here in Cardiff, Wales. So I'm not sure you catch him running today. How are you doing, Matt?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. It's not as wet here, I have to be honest.
Lucky you.
Home in time, but yeah. Besides, rain shouldn't stop you. A good couple of years ago, I was training for a marathon with my wife, and the fastest run she did in all of her training was 9 miles through Cambridge in the wettest weather you can imagine. And literally, we were going through puddles. We came back, and we looked like drowned rats.
I don't know about you, Matt. You say rain doesn't need to be an excuse, but if there's a slight cloud in the sky, I'll just say, right, that's it, can't go, not possibly, cannot run in the rain. But there we are. Now, I'm going to start off with a nosy question, as is the BoD Pod tradition. Now, I believe I'm right in saying that you have 2 young children. I'm interested to know, how has the last year been with them through the various lockdowns we have experienced?
Yeah, it's been different, I think is definitely the case. So our youngest was actually born in January last year, so she just celebrated her first birthday. But that basically means pretty much all she's known is the world of lockdown sort of thing. And our eldest is kind of soon to be 3. It's been a real challenge, but in some ways it's also been great in that I last year was due to take kind of various bits of paternity leave to spend time with our youngest April, which then obviously didn't happen. But actually, the flip side is I got to see bits of her every single day, and all of the developments that you might have missed in terms of her learning to crawl, starting to walk, kind of starting to interact with things like that, I've got to see firsthand. So it's kind of it's a difficult one. You weigh it up and go, yes, it's been really tough. It was probably easier than some people had it in the early stages because my wife was on maternity leave, so at least both of us weren't trying to work. She went in September, and then we've had it now at the point where we're both working. But yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I think you learn a lot about attention span and the fact that actually kind of I genuinely don't know how kind of nursery workers and people in kind of primary schools do it, because our daughters seem to have the attention span of about 3 seconds before they want to do something else, which means you need about 100 things lined up for the day. But yeah, it's been great, and we've become very good at kind of hunting out kind of quiet, small play parks that we can kind of run to with the girls. We've got 2 running buggies, so we kind of tend to do that when we actually get a chance. And yeah, it's been good.
Good, and I think that sets the tone so well for this episode, because I must admit, Matt, when we spoke about this theme before jumping on to record, you have that sensitivity. You don't want to say, it's provided all these opportunities, which, in some ways it has, but not obviously, downplaying the challenges as well. But I think you've perfectly summed it up there in your personal life, that actually there are some silver linings to this situation, despite the fact that it has been incredibly challenging in other areas. So in that tone and in that spirit, let's dive into this topic. Now, if you could set the scene for me. You, I believe, implemented a new inventory system pretty much days before we went into the first lockdown for COVID back in March 2020. How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, so for basically the previous 2 years, we've been planning this migration to a new inventory system. We were using a quite archaic kind of train inventory system that has been around since the kind of 1950s, 60s, and hadn't really developed at the rate that we needed it to. So we had all our plans to move over to a solution called S3, and we did it on the 13th of March 2020. Now, if we look at the people travelling with us, pretty much the last date that people travelled with us was the 13th of March 2020, with kind of things sliding off rather rapidly thereafter. Yeah. So it's definitely one of those ones where you kind of go, had you known the future, we may well have not done it. However, had we not done it, we probably wouldn't have managed to implement that by now, sort of thing, because of the volumes of people furloughed, the kind of complications of trying to coordinate that alongside everything else that's been going on. So it's kind of one of those things where there's very much kind of positives and negatives. I think what we learned from it was, despite our kind of best efforts and kind of, as I say, the best part of 24 months of planning, we did some things very well. We missed a lot of elements too, sort of thing. Okay. So we implemented a solution that, on face value, in terms of the front end, in terms of could someone buy a ticket, could someone check into the train, could someone travel with us, could the data go through our various systems? Yes, big tick, it worked for the vast majority of those cases. In terms of when you then start looking at the back end of, if anything goes wrong, is that information about the customer available, connected, usable? Less so. Similarly, are we able to provide third parties with the information they needed about those customers through that inventory system? Once again, not to the same extent. So I think it took us until the best part of July or August last year, so 5 months on from the migration, to get to a point where we could even provide some basic reporting to some of our largest partners. And it just kind of demonstrates to you that actually data was a key component, but I'm not sure it was the kind of essential component of everything that we were doing through that project. And I think it really made the business kind of look again and kind of go, we need to be a bit more careful next time, because we had a data workstream. Yes, we made sure that certain things were done, but actually we didn't make sure the data ran through every single part of the project. And I appreciate it's difficult to do that. And I'm sure there were lots of people nodding and going, yeah, kind of almost that's an impossibility. But it's certainly something where we've become a lot more mindful of it.
Absolutely. So lots of lessons learned there. Now, I'm keen to know, obviously, implementing it on the brink of such a strange and bizarre time, how did your teams respond to such a challenge? As you say, there were some, really great elements of this project, some not so great elements. So how did they deal with that challenge?
I think a lot of it was the kind of fallout. So obviously, within days, people didn't want to travel. They wanted refunds, they wanted to exchange, they wanted a way of basically saying, I'm not going to be on that train and I don't want to lose my money. And that created a whole manner of new kind of situation scenarios for us that we hadn't necessarily planned for previously, sort of thing. So it was a lot of things that we kind of went, okay, we've got to systematically work through these. So a lot of it was going, right, how quickly can we take stock of where we are and go, this is the situation, these are the things that are as they are, here's a priority list of the things that we need to fix. And then particularly bearing in mind that at that point, the government also introduced their furlough scheme, and Eurostar, as with most companies in the UK, moved to furlough a lot of their employees to go, actually, we need to cut costs at the moment. We've got no one travelling with us. We can't afford to have everyone working full time, sort of thing. Given that restriction, how did we make sure that the priority list was aligned across all teams? Because otherwise, every team had certain things they wanted to do, and things just kept getting stuck because you'd done your bit, it got moved to the next team, and they said, well, that's not even in my top 10, so I'm not going to be able to look at that. And it was a clear kind of disconnect where you went, actually, we've got to get used to remote working. We've got to find ways to go, how do we more closely align, particularly when we've got this kind of reduced capacity?
Absolutely, and it's certainly a theme I've heard on the BoD Pod before. In a recent episode, I was lucky enough to sit down with Lisa Allen from the Ordnance Survey, and she was saying very much a lot of work she does is aligning those priorities with other departments, other organisations as well. So that priority setting, that alignment, is a challenge that I think has been brought forward in the COVID pandemic, but probably something that was always there. And actually aligning different departments and different teams' priority lists is good practice anyway, but probably just a bit more pressing nowadays. Now, we've set the context there, but I think it's about time we dive a little deeper. Now, when we caught up prior to this recording, you were telling me a bit about how you've been building a voucher solution and an interface for your customers to better manage and change their travel given the constant changes. And I mean, you just think of the last year of the different times that we've seen a bit of relaxation, we've seen more stringent lockdown measures. I'm conscious that we do have a global audience, so both Matt and myself are based in the UK, so that's a bit of a UK context there. But even wider than that, I think the changes that we've all experienced, no matter what industry, has fluctuated. It's not just been one constant. So tell me a bit more about that project and what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if we look historically for Eurostar, there was a voucher solution that existed. So if people were unable to travel on a particular leg of their journey, if there were delays or cancellations, or if something wasn't available, you were due to travel in our business premiere and we weren't able to provide you with the food that you should have got, sort of thing, there were compensation vouchers that people could get. But the system was fairly kind of basic and was very much set up with the logic of per kind of ticket, you could be given some level of compensation for that, either the full amount if it was down to you physically couldn't travel, or there was a really significant delay, down to a smaller amount if it was a part of your journey was inconvenienced and we wanted to apologise for that. What it didn't necessarily think through was, what about if no one on our trains is planning on travelling, and we then need to be able to cater for entire journeys and an entire kind of rafts of passengers. So the way that the system worked was basically it produced a voucher per ticket for you, which is fine if you're travelling on your own to Brussels. One way, you get one email, one voucher, really simple. The worst case scenario for us is you can have up to 9 passengers travelling on a return. Now that's 18 individual vouchers that would have come through in 18 individual emails to you, with no kind of classification as to what they related to. So all you do is just go, I've got 18 emails. Are they the same email 18 times? Are they different? What are the random amounts on them? Because I didn't necessarily know what the individual prices of each ticket were. All I knew was my total booking was worth X. And that's before you start adding in the fact that people might have bought insurance or a hotel or kind of any additional ancillaries on top of that. So we had to very much go back to the kind of the beginning and go, right, actually, how do we go back to the drawing board and go, what can we develop for customers to actually provide them with this? Because we were very quick to go, we need to roll something out as quickly as possible. We need to allow people to be able to exchange their tickets naturally, because people don't know how long this is going to last. They would rather exchange it for a voucher than they would say, I'll move it 2 months in advance and then have to go, I've got to move it again and again and again. So what we kind of worked through was going, like, how do we do this? But when we worked through the initial cases with our voucher solution, the versions of things that you were getting to your email, you just went, I barely understand this and I work for Eurostar. There's no way we can send this communication to our customers.
Yeah.
So we worked through, and we've been through a wide range of iterations. We initially started with a really quite manual process that was using the voucher solution, was creating these individual vouchers. We're then collating all those together and saying, we'll only send it as a single email with a list of the vouchers for those customers and things like that. And we will manually match everything up. Yes, we can do some clever stuff with SQL and things like that, but actually it's going to be a very kind of clunky process. And then progressively started to work through and go, actually, we can automate that element of it because there's an API that we can connect to that. We can automate that element because those two systems can actually talk to each other, and starting to go, actually, how do we gradually move to a point where as much of this is automated as possible and as much of this is visible to the customer as possible. So when we first had the voucher solution, they filled in a form and you were told you will get your vouchers within 28 days. And then it could have been radio silence for 27 days, depending on how long it took for us to process those vouchers. Now, most of them were being processed within a few days, but if there was any complications with your booking, if there was anything where it was an edge case, it was slightly different to the others, it might need more manual interactions, more kind of capacity to go through different teams. And so it could take that full kind of months period to a point where in October, November time, we actually have now managed to implement a solution that they log on to their booking online and they there and then have the capacity to be able to request a voucher, make an exchange, and it happens simultaneously. So literally, while they're on their kind of booking, they can make those changes. They will get the email within seconds, and it has made it much easier for customers to go, I understand what's going on, and also to be able to tailor things so that if people's trains are cancelled, they're in a very different situation to if the train's running, but I'm just not sure I want to actually travel. So providing them with that information to be able to kind of understand, right, actually, one of my trains is cancelled, but I could move it and still travel, or actually, both my trains are running, but I've seen the news at the moment, it's saying essential travel only, I don't want to travel on that train, sort of thing. So.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, Matt, take the pandemic out of the situation. How long do you think such a transformation would have taken you to do under normal time, normal resources and normal situation?
I think if I'm honest, years. in that it wouldn't have been deemed a priority. It would have been deemed as one of those kind of nice to haves that would have gone into a kind of later pile as a, yes, we should do this. It's a really good idea. We should develop this. But actually, it's not something that is essential to us. And it's something that I've noticed a lot during my time at Eurostar and at other companies is, as you mentioned at the beginning, there's nothing like a crisis, a disruption, to actually get the cogs whirring on something that otherwise was deemed too low in the priority list, sort of thing. And it's something that I think is really important for us to remember when things, touch wood, return to normal, sort of thing. That phrase we constantly hear, but never really know what it means or when it's going to happen. But it's a really important one for us to go, actually, we need to be taking these things seriously the whole way through, and there needs to be an element of our business as usual. We go, how do we continue to iterate, to fix, to improve, rather than just going after the, oh, this is new and exciting.
And I think it's a wider context as well, isn't it, of having a flexible strategy, because, at the start of the year, as you said, it wasn't high up on the to-do list at all. It wasn't necessarily in your strategy, but suddenly the wider elements of people's stress, people's challenges, and at the end of the day, your customers as a whole demanded this be a top priority, really. I mean, I don't know about you, but I always like to put these situations into my own personal life. And when we were in kind of the March-April period, I received so many communications from all sorts of services that I were using, Trainline, the app, just thinking of kind of travel, lots of different airplane apps that I still have on my phone and I just don't want to delete, emailing me different information, and it became overwhelming. So I can just imagine that, had I been using your service and I got 18 different emails, although behind it is love and helpful and niceness because you're trying to do the best you can, what you're ending up doing is giving a really quite poor customer experience because you're almost generating more stress. So that project suddenly became, as you say, really, really important. And I'd encourage all the audience members to really kind of think of your own self in those customer shoes and how you can use data analytics.
Well, I think it's a key one for us is during the course of the pandemic, Which has done regular reports on travel companies and their capacity for people to be able to exchange, get refunds, etc., things like that. And when the first one came out, I think in May, which was very much based on the early part of the pandemic, what had happened in March and April, we ranked somewhere in the middle. We weren't the worst, but we were by no means the best. And what was noticeable to us is actually having gone through kind of, I think they were on their third or fourth iteration of this survey before Christmas. And we'd moved up into the top 10. And that was purely down to us actually being able to put the customer first and go, how do we make this central? But it was also having that mindset of, this isn't the only thing it's doing. So if we've got to justify this to the business, it's also the workload, the resource that was needed for us to do it manually at the beginning was so substantial. Yeah. You were talking about dozens of people in our contact center, large numbers of people across our data teams, our CRM teams, our IS function sort of thing. And actually to be able to go, we can build this into a way where it barely requires any of them. Yes, there are some edge cases where we still need an individual to look at it, but it's a tiny fraction of what it was. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of weigh up both and go, not only is this reducing the kind of stress on the business, but it's also improving the customer experience. And for the purpose, it's a win-win.
Absolutely. Now I'm watching the clock, and as always, time just falls away from these episodes, and I'm keen to know, so that's kind of looking forward as to what we can do to improve our processes, but it's also a time I think that we can kind of review processes and approaches as well, a time to look back and think, are there things that we're doing that perhaps aren't as efficient? As you say, it's a case of, are there win-win scenarios where it will help the business and also customers or perhaps stakeholders? So what other areas do you think you'll be revisiting in terms of ensuring success for the future?
Well, I think there's a number of them. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier on about customer comms, and it was exactly the case for us. Is right at the beginning of the pandemic, people were getting unnecessary amounts of communication from us because you might have multiple bookings in the future. You might have different scenarios where you're waiting on an e-voucher or a refund for one thing, but actually you've got something in the future. And how do we know what to prioritize? More importantly, how do we know what communications you as the customer are going to be getting, rather than going, we will just bombard you with things about every which way. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a lot of work to go, how do we tidy that up? how do we also make sure that we're sure that customers are receiving the communications? So with less people in our stations, it's been quite a nice opportunity for us to work with the station staff to go, whenever you encounter a problem, document it, give us the information, and let's work out what went wrong. Let's work out why someone turned up for a cancelled train. Let's work out why someone didn't get that piece of communication. And it's allowed us to dig into our kind of data and go, there are clear gaps in places. So we capture contact information of as many passengers as possible so that should anything go wrong, we can let you know at the earliest convenience. One of the things that we've discovered is actually the format of that contact information, particularly phone numbers, comes through in a whole manner of different ways. And depending on the source, if it's come from Eurostar.com, it has a particular format. But actually, if it's come from the plethora of other people that sell our services, be that Trainline, be that SNCF, be that kind of various kind of aggregators like Last Minute and things like that, it comes through in different formats. And so it's how do we actually kind of regulate that? And first of all, how do we correct them so that we can at least get the comms out to people? So we spent a lot of time building algorithms to go, actually, let's query these phone numbers and make sure they're in the correct formats. And if not, let's tinker with them to try and work out. So if something starts +4433, that's probably not right. It's probably 2 country codes that it's got there, and actually one of them needs removing. So can we work out from the rest of the number, it's a French number, therefore we need the 33. It's a UK number, therefore we need the 44. So a lot was done to build that out, and actually we managed to improve our kind of connectivity by 20-30% sort of thing in terms of the number of people that we could definitely get a message to. And we've always found in these scenarios, SMS is so much more effective than sending someone an email that they may or may not check sort of thing. You think about yourself, and I'm pretty sure you check your WhatsApp messages, your messages, things like that far more regularly than you probably check your email. But what we're now trying to do is go, that's great, but we're still having to fix something that's a problem. So how do we now go a step back and go, well, why is it a problem in the first place? And how do we put that kind of governance in place for all of those third parties to say, no, the format that you give us this in has to fall in line with this so that we don't have to do that.
Absolutely. And again, it's so interesting, Matt, the themes that you're talking about. I'm drawing so many correlations to other discussions I've had with completely different industries. I chatted to Tim Carey, who's a health executive in the US, and it's exactly a challenge he's been dealing with, in the fact that they've having to report massive amount of data to the government on COVID, and it's coming from all the different hospitals and care places in so many different formats, and he's got to somehow put this together. And in the beginning, just the same as your story, where it was kind of, okay, well, let's format this correctly, and then actually in the end it was a case of, hang on, why am I receiving it in so many different formats? Right, you now have to change it, and that process could then make sure that they had the most up-to-date COVID data. So it's really interesting what you say there, and actually how I think loads of people in the audience are going to be able to apply those sorts of stories and those learnings to really question, why are these challenges occurring, and being able to go back. Now,
well, I think the opportunity at the moment that we have is it's a different type of urgency. The one advantage we've got at the moment is all of the projects that we would normally be working on are largely on hold at the moment. So it does give you that opportunity to actually go, kind of, let's do a bit of a reset here, and let's tackle these things, whether it's kind of adding rigor to processes, whether it's kind of fixing systems, whether it's restructuring data in a way that we want it. They're things that normally wouldn't get looked at. And actually, the past few months and the coming months are a real opportunity for us to kind of go, let's shift our mentality to look at these. And then hopefully when we go back to business as usual, these will still end up a component of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, so that they kind of don't get forgotten and kind of fallen by the wayside to a point that they're so broken, you've then got to do kind of extreme measures.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I am keen to take the last part of our conversation and kind of go a little left field, because there was a story that you and I, you told me and we spoke about prior to this episode, and I thought, what a great way to really blend your personal life with your professional. Now, obviously, everyone knows I always ask the nosy questions first, and it's because I'm a true believer that people's personal life does not get separated from work, and a lot of the time it influences it, and it influences you as a leader. Now, I know you said right at the top of our conversation that homeschooling or home nursery was quite a challenge for your oldest, and I believe I'm correct in saying in the first few days, or might extend to a week, you tried to do quite a structured way of learning and tried to kind of copy what what she would have been experiencing at nursery, and you soon found out that perhaps wasn't the best way to go. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because there was quite a direct correlation that you experienced with your data literacy program as well, wasn't there, where you took what you were doing in real life, I say in real life, in a physical sense, and you tried to move it remotely, and it perhaps didn't work as well. And I'd love for you to just tell that story to the audience, because I think it's a really interesting lesson that you learned there.
Sure, absolutely. So I think for us, there's been a real drive over the last 2 years to try and embed data literacy in the business. So a way of thinking that people kind of think about data first. They ask questions of data. They don't necessarily need to be the most kind of data savvy. We're not expecting them to have amazing kind of Python or R skills. What we're expecting them to do is to challenge anything that's happening and kind of go, have I looked at the data correctly? And if they have the capability, do some analysis themselves. But if not, ask the right person the right question. And through that, we've been trying to implement various kind of bits and pieces over the past couple of years, from internal training to kind of full-on kind of apprenticeship courses to kind of upskill people, and even implementing a data graduate scheme. But the one thing that we noticed when we moved into kind of lockdown and everyone working remotely is a lot of those things were great in principle, but actually in practice they just simply didn't work. So we used to do classroom teaching on SQL, where one of our kind of particularly advanced SQL people would basically go, I'm going to take this group of, depending on level, through kind of a set of bits and pieces where they will learn how to use something, and then they will demonstrate it by accessing a SQL database, running a query, seeing what they can get out. And normally we'd have one person teaching and 2 or 3 kind of assistants who were similarly skilled SQL kind of practitioners who could basically walk around the room and kind of go, oh, that's not going to work because you've made a mistake there, or have you thought about doing that in that order, or kind of it will run more effectively this way. Now, obviously, remotely, that's a lot more of a challenge. And particularly when you also think that those classroom teaching, it was often quite extensive. So you might do a full morning or even a full day of kind of teaching. That wasn't possible in kind of the remote environment. People get distracted. There are other things going on. And I mean, if people have got their cameras on, you can see. But even then, they could be doing things on their computer that are nothing to do with what you're trying to teach them, let alone if they leave their computer and go and do something else. And then you think about all the people who actually haven't even got their cameras on, and who knows whether they're actually there or not, sort of thing. And it becomes a real challenge. And I think for me, that was a complete correlation with our daughter. We had these things planned out. One of the ones that I remember kind of vividly was we'd seen that if you take a 4-pint milk container, you can basically turn it into an elephant. And if you get loads of Post-it notes of different colours, you can turn it into Elma. Look, brilliant. She loves Elma. She's going to have a fantastic time for all of about 25 seconds. At which point she was bored of sticking Post-it notes onto the elephant. And you went, you've done about a tenth of it. And it was one thing that, do you persevere? Because we get things back from nursery that look spectacular.
Yeah, so, exactly.
And we ended up finding with her that there were 2 ways that you could do things. If you wanted her to complete it, then what you had to do was just break it down and go, right, over the next 2 weeks, we will do 5 minutes at different points, sort of thing, and eventually she will have completed it, and we know that it's 100% her effort and things like that. Alternatively, there are things where we go, we kind of need to get this done now. She loves baking, mainly because we've made it quite clear to her that if she wants pudding, she's got a comment. And therefore, she always wants pudding, so she always wants to do some baking, whether that's scones or crumble or cakes or all sorts of things. But her attention span to be able to do that isn't there. So we very much end up going, we will do this part with her. We'll then let her run around the kitchen playing while we do something else until there's something more exciting that she can do. So she loves mixing things together. She loves licking the spoon. She loves cutting out kind of anything in shapes and things like that. Does she really want to have to do something that's going to take 10 minutes of doing X? Not really. She's quite happy for mummy and daddy to do it in the background, but she'd rather be doing something else, playing with something else. And we end up just going, let's split those things out and go, actually, this is how we need to engage you. And for me, it's the same with people at work. There are people where you really need them to get it, where actually you're training them on something that's quite complicated, in which case it needs to be done in bite-sized bits. Doing 20 minutes to half an hour is fine. Trying to do something for 2 hours, most of them won't still be there. And also doing things in slightly smaller groups is much more effective. Whereas actually for some of our kind of more senior people, it's very much that actually I'm going to take up 5 minutes of one of your meetings to show you something. You don't care about the underlying works of it.
Yeah.
And actually, for me to get it so that you remember it and are using it regularly, you probably need that to happen 3 or 4 times over the next 3 or 4 weeks sort of thing. And we can just time those in. So it kind of felt to me like there was a real kind of correlation there between the two.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why I wanted you to tell this story, because I feel like everyone can apply a milk carton elephant scenario to their own work life, and actually remembering the human element of data and data teams as well is so important. So as opposed to your daughter, where there's lots of exciting shiny things she could be doing, the stresses and wider contexts that your team are feeling is the kind of correlation to that example. You know, at the end of the day, we're most of us are still remote working in some element, and you don't know what's going on behind. So trying to do things that they may not be completely bought into, you have to have that wider awareness. So I think that's a really good example of how you can take something that you need to do but adapt it to the current situation that we're in. So thank you so much for that. Now, final question, Matt, before I let you go today, is if you could go back 5 years and offer yourself a piece of advice, whether that be professional or personal, what would that be?
Oh, I think for me, on the kind of professional side of things, it would be very much around there are going to be difficult people that you work with, and don't shy away from that. In the kind of, I think when I was more junior, I quite often would go, actually, I find that I don't agree with this person, or this person doesn't want to work with us on X. So therefore, I'll work with all the people that do want to, and that means that we can achieve things and continue progressing. But that person's still there, and actually, part of it is probably that they just don't understand what you're trying to do or why it's really a benefit to them, sort of thing. So I think it is one of those things of you need to build those relationships and go, how can you actually break down that? You're never going to get everyone 100% on your side, but actually, let's at least get to a point where you understand each other and you understand what you're both trying to achieve, so that you don't have that as so much of a barrier.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Matt. It's always a pleasure catching up with you. Thank you for giving me so much of your time for the BoD Pod today.
No problem.
Well, there we go. What a great conversation. And I think it's quite clear from just chatting there to Matt that there are many silver linings to this very challenging time, and actually not just a time to look forward about what we need to do to adapt our strategies, just as Eurostar have done there with their vouchers for their customers, but also a time to look back and look at perhaps the processes that aren't the most efficient and how we can change those to make sure those resources are being best used. I think out of all the conversations I've had with data leaders is that demand is higher than it ever has been and will continue to be. So making sure that resources are always being used to their most efficient level is definitely a high priority. And I love just finishing off that conversation chatting about Matt's experience with his daughter and nursery and how he had to adapt her learning and how he had to do the same thing for the data literacy program as well. I think that's really, really interesting. As always, make sure you subscribe to the Business of Data platform to be first in line for our thought-leading content, and do make sure you're following us on socials as well so that you're able to engage and connect with thought leaders just like yourself. For now, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next time.